that they were the sort of missing link before T-Rex.
Well, T-Rex started off, Tyrannosaurus Rex, as a sort of knockoff of the Incredible String Band, and supported, we're still on the Incredible String Band, and supported the Incredible String Band in the early days. For me personally, in between the Beatles and David Bowie, which is not a very long period, it's only about 2 years, there was the Incredible String Band and then T-Rex.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Another slightly serious question, but it does come across in the lyrics. I mean, obviously one of your biggest hits of Pet Shop Boys, It's a Sin. And you do write in the introduction to the book, and you've spoken about it before in interviews, about having a Roman Catholic education. Now, I mean, within the literary world, obviously being a Roman Catholic is, can have, think of Graham Greene, Evelyn Waugh, it can have a big effect on your writing. Do you think that your Roman Catholic background shaped your attitude to writing, shaped your subject matter, or did it just shape everything and your writing with it?
Again, it's a bit like the Incredible String Band. It gave me a sense of theatre. I mean, I was an altar boy from the age of 7 or 8. And, when I was 8 years old, I would get on my bicycle and drive to the Sacred Heart Church in North Gosforth for 8 o'clock Mass. And me and the priest would do the whole Latin Mass in less than 20 minutes with an audience of 3 old ladies. And it gave me a sense of theatre because he wore interesting costumes, and on Sundays there was incense. And it definitely
psychedelic.
It gave me a sense of ritual, which I've always, it's no accident in our first tour, directed by Derek Jarman, I'm dressed as the Pope. It comes from being an altar boy.
Yeah. So, which leads us on a slightly Catholic question, actually, which is how important is personal sadness and internal conflict to being a writer?
What's the question?
How important is personal sadness or internal conflict to creativity?
I probably don't think of either of them in those terms, but they're probably another. You said about living through the war. I thought you were going to say that our generation's war was AIDS. Was living through, which we still do, but maybe not in such a totally tragic way, in terms of Britain anyway. And, when Chris and I became famous, this is also mentioned in one of the commentaries to the songs in the book, my best friend, who was in Dust, it's called Chris Dowell, came back from Sri Lanka where he was teaching, and he had a very bad cold and all the rest of it. And Chris and I were doing promotion for Suburbia, and he suddenly phoned up, and his partner phoned me up and said he'd been taken to a hospital. And you suddenly realised, in those days, HIV was regarded as the beginning of AIDS, and that he had AIDS. And so for all of those years of Left to My Own Devices and It's a Sin and making records with Dusty and stuff, I was in St. Mary's Hospital, Paddington, visiting this very close friend of mine who was just dying gradually, and there were good days and bad days. And it was impossible for that not to go in the songs. But I remember when we wrote It Couldn't Happen Here, that was about, It Couldn't Happen Here was referring to AIDS, and the fact, this is in the book as well, that me and Chris Dowell, Christopher Dowell, had a conversation where he was saying that he'd read it wasn't going to happen in Britain like it did in the United States. And then, of course, it did. And so it really informed everything I wrote, or a lot of what I wrote. But it couldn't happen here as a very oblique lyric, because I wrote it and I didn't really want Chris Dowell to know what it was about in case he was upset by it. So it's a very sort of poetic lyric and rather oblique, because I didn't want to say it in an obvious way. And that, went on, as you know, through Your Funny Uncle and Being Boring. And it goes on to The Survivors, which I think comes out in 1996. And after that, I didn't know anyone else who died of AIDS. But during that, the first 10 years of the Pet Shop Boys, I knew, a lot of people who disappeared because of this. And so that had a profound effect.
I mean, it's interesting because, I think I first interviewed you and Chris probably in 1989 for Blitz magazine with the writer John Wilde. And at that time, the two words which were thrown around about Pet Shop Boys, it seemed to you, if you were a journalist, was, that it was melancholy and that it was ironic. And I've seen, I think the melancholy persists in your writing. I think every album has normally one or two melancholy songs on it. I never really got the irony thing, though. Could you actually maybe talk a little bit about both those qualities? About whether you sit down to, when you write something which later you feel is very melancholy, but also, have you ever felt that what you're doing is ironic or is using irony?
Well, right at the beginning, we wrote Let's Spend Lots of Money, which was a satire. And the famous line Let's Spend Lots of Money was actually Chris's idea. And so we wrote this kind of ironic satire about Thatcherism and that whole loads of money thing that was just, that was in 1983, And, but I think that became such a famous song that everyone assumed that everything we did was a sort of ironic satire. And I always say to people, if you listen to our first album, it's so full of heartfelt longing, and but the satire and the irony is obviously creatively stronger for the audience. That people, maybe that was more original, because there's a lot of pop music of melancholy and longing, but there's not that much. There's Ray Davies, there's not that much satire and irony in pop music like there is in a sort of ballad of longing, which there's gazillions. But both had a truth for us. Chris and I have satirical personalities, particularly Chris, I think, in fact, probably more than me. And I have a sort of, romantic sentiment and awareness of the gap between desire and reality or something, I don't know. And music can fill that gap very easily.
Yeah. It's interesting when, the landscape of pop music in 1985, 86, and so in other words, when West End Girls came out, was sort of kind of interesting. It was very eclectic and, there'd been a lot going on. When you wrote West End Girls, where did you see it fitting into the pop landscape of its time? Or did you not really see it fitting anywhere? Did you sort of...
Well, this was quite an exciting time for us, because the lyric of West End Girls was written in, I think, 1983, early 83, and we recorded the first version in 83. And this was an exciting musical time for me and Chris, because we thought that we liked music that most people didn't like. And that music was basically gay disco, which became high energy music, and finally by the end of the 80s became Stock Aitken Waterman, the sound of pop. And the other music was the early hip hop, like Grandmaster Flash, Planet Patrol, and all those records coming out of New York in particular. And so we'd written this instrumental, and I just had this idea for a rap in the style of The Message by Grandmaster Flash. And so West End Girls has the same rhythm in the spoken parts as the rap of The Message by Grandmaster Flash. And that at the time was original. It wasn't everywhere. It wasn't in the latest Spandau Ballet or Duran record. And so it was an exciting period because we felt we had something that other people didn't have. We didn't think we were the only people to have it, but we knew that no one who was really successful from Britain was doing this kind of thing.
Because, I mean, do you feel that over the years, your lyrics, I mean, reading the book, that your lyrics have become more complex, more, I mean, I think sometimes listening or reading the lyrics of, you know, the first two albums, for instance, they seem sort of, shall we say, more pared down. Then you sort of look at a later song, say something like The King of Rome or Casanova in Hell or Love is a Bourgeois Construct, or things like that. They're quite complex, they're quite wordy. And I was wondering whether you feel that your writing as a lyricist has become denser, if you want.
Well, I try for it not to be dense, because at the end of the day it's pop music, and that's not really a medium for density, if that's the right word. But it's undoubtedly a fact for any songwriter or anyone in any artistic practice, really, that at the beginning they probably have a few very direct ideas that they then develop. And I think that's no different with us, because I also think musically you've written so many songs, you know more about it. I mean, I really like to be direct, but then I suppose you have an idea of where you could take a pop song. Sometimes you have an idea where you could how to write a Pet Shop Boys pop song, like Love is a Bourgeois Construct. You think of that, and you think, oh, that's a really Pet Shop Boys kind of idea, isn't it? And it's sort of great when you stumble across something like that. So I don't deliberately try to be more sophisticated. I guess it's just part of growing older and experience.
Because, I mean, the other thing that I'm sure when people read the book, if you haven't read it already, the annotations that you give to each lyric are incredibly interesting and reveal all kinds of fascinating insights into your lyric writing process. And one of the things that I was struck by was that you're a very close and serious reader of social and political history. And there must be more than half a dozen lyrics out of the ones in the book where you say in the annotation that, you know, it was inspired by or is a reference to sometimes some really quite complex aspects of modern European history and things.
Well, in compiling the book and then writing the commentary for each one, I actually after a while became embarrassed by, I thought, God, all I do is nick these ideas from books. And I was sort of quite surprised how many there were, to be honest. I didn't think I did it that often. But I suppose what I'm trying to do is take something, just a little aspect of something from a book that interests me and put it in a pop song. And also I try to put it, as it's a pop song, to put it in a... Well, there's two things. I think in a pop song you can say mysterious things that you don't necessarily have to understand. I mean, when John Lennon wrote Strawberry Fields Forever, you sort of understood it and you sort of didn't. And there's something sort of great about that. And that kind of song, Incredible String Band, of course, we're very much like that. I've always liked that kind of song. Bob Dylan, I mean, there's many Bob Dylan songs you don't really understand. And Bob Dylan actually has always been, or for many years, has been quite a strong influence on me. And I've forgotten what I'm talking about.
Actually, you're... Well, actually, this allows me to mention T.S. Eliot and who's the other one? Who wrote The Big Sleep? Who wrote The Big Sleep? Raymond Chandler.
Raymond Chandler.
Raymond Chandler, yeah. Because both T.S. Eliot and Raymond Chandler have pointed out that sometimes things not making sense gives them tremendous power. I mean, Eliot was convinced that a lot of the kind of mythic attention that the Wasteland attracted was because people couldn't understand a lot of it. And likewise,
I've certainly never understood it. But the poetry of it, the different voices talking about strange and disparate and even exotic things, is completely riveting and makes you want to read it again and again. I guess hoping to find more meaning.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been I love those songs of yours like King of Rome and Legacy, Requiem and Denim and Leopard Skin, and things which are quite long and have that quality to them.
Well, often it's about the sound of the words. And that words have a beauty, and you think, well, I want this to sound, I'd rather this sounded beautiful than made sense. And sometimes making sense spoils the beauty.
Yeah, I mean, which brings me conveniently to question 6A, which is, obviously, you've written a musical, and earlier you mentioned Mary Poppins. I share your admiration for Mary Poppins. And I wanted to ask, to what extent have musicals influenced your writing?
Well, growing up in the 60s, as I mentioned earlier, we had a gramophone, as we used to call them in those days, and we had pop singles, and then my parents had a handful of albums, and they had the best-selling LP of the 1960s, the soundtrack of The Sound of Music. And they had the original cast recording of My Fair Lady with Rex Harrison and Julie Andrews. I can't think what else they had. They had strange things like Ray Conniff and his orchestra and Bert Camford, and these were middle-of-the-road, sort of dinner party music records. Actually, funny enough, that easy listening, we would now call it. Yeah. A sound I've always, probably because of imbibing at such an early age, I've always quite liked that easy listening sound as well. And there's even a sort of minor influence on the Pet Shop Boys. But My Fair Lady had a big influence because all these witty, sort of post-Gilbert and Sullivan lyrics. And I could have recited the whole thing, I probably still could actually, from start to finish. And that definitely, I remember when I was on Desert Island Discs a few years ago, I decided to choose the records in chronological order. And so like the first or second record was something from My Fair Lady. And I realized, why can't the English teach their children how to speak? This vertical class distinction by now should be antique. That these things have had an effect on the way I write lyrics now.
I mean, there's a few really great Pet Shop Boys songs that, to me, seem to come straight from the world of musicals. And I wonder if you'd agree with them. I mean, one would be Decadence.
Yes.
Stop this caprice, you've got to cease this fantasy et pretense, Another one would be Shameless.
Shameless, we actually put in our musical, because it was just, it was exactly the right song for the scene.
And I mean, for me, I had quite a teary moment the other week because I was reading your book. The great thing about the book is that it makes you listen to the records again. So I read the book and I immediately listened to Fundamental and revisited that record. And in doing so, listened to Indefinite Leave to Remain, which is amazing. I mean, that would be a huge hit in a musical, I'm sure. You didn't write it for the musical, did you?
No, it just describes a scene that comes out of a memoir. It's John Lennon's wife, Cynthia Lennon, as I say in the book, I read her memoir, and Cynthia Lennon came back from holiday, and she came back home to the house she shared with her husband, John Lennon, in Weybridge in Surrey. And she went into the house to say, we're all going into London for dinner, are you going to come? And there was John sitting on the sofa with Yoko, sort of intertwined with Yoko. And she says something along the lines of, she realised at that point the marriage was finished. And I just thought what an awful moment of realisation. And also, she dealt with it in a very English way of being a bit embarrassed and sort of apologising and leaving.
It's interesting because you're recalling a song you wrote called I Made My Excuses and Left.
What did you just say, sorry?
Indefinite Leave to Remain.
Well, they've got the same number of words in the title, probably.
There's a link.
Yeah.
There's a
well,
link.
to be fair, they're on the same album.
They're on there's another link.
Now then, what were you saying about Indefinite Leave to Remain?
I was saying about...
I thought it went a bit quiet there. Well, Indefinite Leave to Remain, I'll just launch it anyway. We have a friend who comes from Sri Lanka, and he lived here for a long time. And he finally got British citizenship.
Yeah.
And I signed his form. And the form was called, Indefinite Leave to Remain, or that was the certificate you got when you got citizenship. And I said, wow, what a beautiful phrase, indefinite leave to remain. And it immediately suggested to me the idea of a love song where two people have been together and broken up, and one of them has realised it's all a mistake and wants to come back and wants to get married. That's what was the question?
Well, no, that was... I think we've... yeah...
The point being that there's a lot of poetry comes out of everyday life. I think that's the biggest, source for me.
Yeah, I think also, not wanting to embarrass you, I think that Indefinite Leave to Remain in my book is one of the greatest love songs I've ever heard. I think it's...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I can't really think like that. But when we wrote it, we wrote it in Naples, actually. I love the sound of the words, just this phrase, indefinitely leave to remain.
There's another question. Chris Heath, who has worked with you a lot, the writer, wrote an absolutely amazing book called Pet Shop Boys versus America. Yeah, what a great book.
I think it's going to be republished by Penguin.
Yeah.
And the other one, literally. I think we're in discussions anyway.
Yeah. And he gives this most amazing account of an relatively early Pet Shop Boys tour to America. And then I was looking at the lyric book, and I was really interested to notice, or that I felt, that whereas an awful lot of writers in pop and rock music are inspired by the glamour of America, of Americana, reading your lyrics, and particularly reading the annotations to them, it seems that you are almost more inspired by the glamour of Russia and Eastern Europe. Is that true? That you're really probably more sort of turned on artistically by Russia and the East than you are by the States?
I hadn't thought of it as a sort of competition with America, but yeah, it's undoubtedly the case. When I was very young, I bought it at a jumble sale or something, a book. I was about 10 years old, a book about the Russian Revolution. And I don't know, there was just something about that incredibly drastic change, and yet change that in some ways doesn't happen. So there's a change from autocratic monarchic government to communism, but it's autocratic communism. And then there's all incredible culture, of music, of Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky, and and the art that comes out of that period, and poetry like Anna Akhmatova, and it's, you know, the art that comes out of pain, that's so powerful that you know, even now there's nothing I like reading more than, well, I've tried to ration myself because I think it's almost unhealthy, but I like to read Russian history. American history is more familiar to us, or American recent history is more familiar to us, and the surface of American culture is, of course, totally fascinating. But there's something, and also Russia doesn't reveal itself easily, to put it politely, and I think that is fascinating as well.
Yeah, because it's interesting, even on Nightlife, I think, there's a song called Happiness is an Option, where that has a Slavic proverb in the middle of it, doesn't it?
Well, someone told me it's not, a Russian told me, this proverb does not exist in Russia. And I said, really? And the proverb is something about man is born under a blue sky but dies in the middle of a dark forest. There you go. You see, I've got Russians down here are confirming that this is simply not true. Nonetheless, it's quite a good proverb. Maybe I invented it. I don't think I did, though, because I'm busy reading a book at the moment about a memoir. I think he might be here, by Luke Turner, and it's about forests and sex and all sorts of things. And I keep thinking, man is born under a blue sky but dies in the middle of a dark forest, which is not a proverb in Russia. Maybe it's Polish. Maybe it's German.
No, it's not German.
Maybe it's Finnish from northern Finland.
Shall we settle for Finland?
I still think it's true. And I was under the impression, because I read it in a book of Russian proverbs, that it was Russian. Maybe it was fake news.
Okay.
But, sorry, what's the point about this? I've lost the plot.
I think the Incredible String Band, however, did.
Yes.
Okay, so have you ever set out to write a funny song?
Oh, yes. My mind's gone blank now. Well, when we wrote I Was Stupid, it was sort of meant to be funny. But there are probably... Shameless.
Yeah.
We're shameless, we will do anything to get our 50 minutes of fame. We have no integrity, we're ready to crawl. To obtain celebrity, we'll do anything at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like Gilbert and Sullivan, isn't it?
Yeah. It is, yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, because, I remember once interviewing Malcolm McDowell, the film actor, and him saying how he felt that sort of often artists are too ready to sort of disregard humour because they sort of think they shouldn't do it or something, and yet it's such a mainstay in many ways. And
well, humour and pop music is
it's tricky.
It's tricky because pop music is always meant to be sort of sexy, and humour, as we all know, doesn't really work necessarily in that situation, and when you're in an area of comedy songs, I mean, again, Ray Davies, dedicated follower of fashion or something, is, but it's not what they now call laugh out loud funny. It's sort of wry, sardonic humour, and that works pretty well in pop music. I remember on the first night of Closer to Heaven, our musical, when the manager, the guy playing the manager, Saunders, came on stage and sang, "I have to admit, I'm an absolute shit. At least you can't call me a hypocrite." And the audience laughed. It was a great feeling.
Yeah.
It was. I realised what comedians must like. When you say something, everyone laughs. It's incredible.
Yeah. This is the first of two Brian Eno-related questions.
Okay.
The first is, Brian Eno once told me that pop music isn't about making music in the traditional sense of the word. It's about creating new imaginary worlds and inviting people to join them. Is that true?
Well, it's something we've tried to do. When Chris and I first started writing songs together, then it became the Pet Shop Boys, and we took it pretty seriously right from the beginning, I think. But we had the idea that we were creating our own world. We've said this many times in interviews. And that we might invite people into it, like Dusty Springfield or whatever. But it didn't necessarily have to refer to other people's music, by which we meant contemporary pop music. And so that we could have influences that other people didn't have, like early hip-hop or Russian culture or something like that. And we would make something that people could say, oh, that's very Pet Shop Boys. I don't know if you thought it was through quite as calculatingly as that, but it was more a sort of instinct of taste and subject matter. But I think we to some extent, we did. I know because I often read record reviews where people say, oh, the Pet Shop Boys-esque, such and such. And so I think to some extent we succeeded with that.
I mean, this is a little off the subject of the lyrics, but certainly in the staging of your music and the sort of costumes and makeup and so on. If one thinks about, say, Pointy Hats period, Pet Shop Boys, or Nightlife period, Pet Shop Boys, I mean, it's almost like at times you play with Pet Shop Boys like they're kind of comic book characters or, you know, something. Is that?
Well, I think it's Neil Tennant and Chris Lowe trying to back away from it a bit and replace ourselves with versions of ourselves, which feels a bit more comfortable. Because it feels like it takes the spotlight off you as a real person and puts it on these Pet Shop Boys. And well, actually, I think probably quite a lot of performers do that, actually. But it makes it easier.
Do you would you sort of agree with Oscar Wilde's notion that if you give a man a mask, he'll tell the truth?
Well, actually, I've never heard that before.
Haven't you?
No, I don't think so. No, that's right. I'd have to think about it more, but I think so, yes.
I mean, another thing which I remember I spoke to you and Chris not so very long ago, and you said this interesting thing about how Adam Ant's line, ridicule is nothing to be scared of, was very important to Pet Shop Boys.
Well, only because, I mean, that's what Adam Ant was doing in the very early 80s, you know. And I assume that's why he sang that. But I think it's true, actually. I know Andy Warhol said, if you're doing something that everyone hates, you must be doing something right. Yeah. And Chris always quotes that. And I think I think we've had periods where we do that.
Which ones?
Nightlife in particular. Well, actually, no, Release in particular. No. Yeah, you see, the Russians didn't like Release.
I loved Release.
I like Release too, yeah.
I liked it because you were doing that whole thing about constructed authenticity.
We might not have put it like that.
Okay. Right. Second Brian Eno question.
Okay.
Brian Eno also once told me that a great pop song is summarized by its title. True? Okay, so his point was that a really great pop song, you knew that you basically heard the whole song, you got the whole thrill of it just off the title.
Yeah, yes, I think it's true, and the reason it's true is because it means, if it can be condensed in the title, it probably means it's a very strong idea, and therefore it's going to be a strong pop song. So, you know, a lot of our more famous songs, you know, It's a Sin, it's all in the title, Western Girls, Left to My Own Devices, that being boring, no, because it's the meaning of the song is the opposite of that. But yeah, there's quite a lot of truth in it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether that's helpful, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because Eno was talking, I mean, he went on to talk about Roxy Music titles, and he said for him a title like Over You or Same Old Scene or whatever was, you know, you got the whole song just out of the title. And I think he sort of got a point. But
Yeah, no, in Every Dream Home a Heartache.
yeah, that's another one.
Yeah.
But one of the question that follows on from this is, again, about lyrics and about meaning, really. Do you believe that a great pop song, and the two examples I chose were Sally Go Round the Roses by the Janettes and Jeepster by T-Rex, that they're both examples of fantastic pop songs that aren't about anything, really. They're a sort of tribal chant. They're an energy. And you could say that Vocal by Pet Shop Boys is very similar.
Well, no, Vocal is very specifically about
dancing and raves, but
yeah.
it's,
Well,
you know.
that's some. I mean,
But
if you mentioned Jeepster, I mean, Mark Bolan was a genius at writing brilliant gobbledygook poetry that rocked. A Metal Guru. Is it true? I mean, it's a fantastic lyric, and it sings fantastically, and it's glamorous. And so what it says is sort of by inference rather than by spelling it out.
Do you think there's many examples of Pet Shop Boys, of you with your own lyrics, of things like that, where it's almost, I can think of one or two. I mean, Vocal, I think, is such an extraordinary pop song. But then I don't know if it's a pop song, really. It's,
I mean, it's a dance record rather than a pop song. But I don't really have the brain that writes a Metal Guru. I would like to be able to write gobbledygook. There's a B-side in the lyrics in this book called Don Juan, where I was trying to write something in the style of Edith Sitwell, the English poet of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And she wrote sort of great gobbledygook. And I tried to do it with that, but it's too much of a stretch for me, really.
You also say in the annotations to your lyrics, it's interesting because it gives us a guide to the sort of things you read and listen to and all the rest of it. And you say that you've never read Proust. And
Well, who has?
And my question was, do you intend to?
Do you know, I think the moment where I would do that might have passed. But I keep thinking I might read the Palliser novels by Anthony Trollope.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
But I think there's only 6 of them. I've got them at home. And also, I'd love to read the entire Human Comedy by Balzac. Because I've probably read 3 of them, the 3 famous ones. And I think it's an amazing thing to do, to write a series of novels that covers an entire era of a country and its culture and its history, in a period where its culture and history are really fascinating.
Well, I'm going to seize the moment to repeat what I said at the start. I think your records do that. I think that they chart, if you want, the end of the machine age and the beginning of the digital age. I think that they cover, like a novel, myself. I mean, I don't suppose you set out for one moment to do that. But
No, but we have, over a period of 35 years, written pop songs about what's going on around us.
I was going to say social...
So you sort of collect that after 35 years. Without setting out to do it, you've done it because you've collected that from early Thatcherism to Brexit.
And also, you've often said in interviews that social commentary is one of your main motivations for writing. Is that...
Well, it's
Not main, but it's in there.
It is, because it comes out of reading and conversation and living. So I find it very difficult. And also it's just ridiculous sometimes. And so I find it inspiring.
I'm going to ask Neil one more question, and then what would be really fabulous would be if you could all join in. I mean, not with this question, but...
Although it's an idea. Yeah. For all the Quietus listeners at home,
yeah,
because this is being broadcast live as we speak.
Broadcast live.
Big shout to those people.
Yes. So I'm gonna ask one more, and then we're gonna turn it over to you, because I know you'll all have really great questions, and Neil's very happy to answer them. And so my last question to you at the moment is, yes, does intellectualism have a place in pop music? Likewise, as argued by Dan Fox, can pretentiousness be a creative virtue? Virtue.
I think I'll answer the second half first, as politicians always say. I think pretentiousness can really be a virtue in pop music, simply because it's trying to expand pop music. It's trying to bring something into pop music which isn't normally there. So if you wrote something, I'm being attacked by a fly, if you write something about the Russian Revolution in pop music, it's pretentious, it is, but it's brought something new, and so maybe that pretentiousness has a freshness about it. And what was the first thing? I've forgotten.
Does intellectualism have a place?
Intellectualism is difficult in pop music because pop music, the very notion of pop music, is that it should have an ease about it. So something can be mysterious, but still have an ease about it. Whereas if you're closely arguing something in intellectual terminology and language, I mean, I try to refer to it in Love as a Bourgeois construct, but not be it. So I think my answer is no, I don't think it does. It could do in art songs, which is a distant cousin of the pop song, but it's not really pop.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can intellectualism, no; pretentiousness, yes.
Yes,
I think that's,
there you go.
That up. Right, great. So yeah, questions, please. Yes. Okay. So there are roving microphones. Yes, there's a lady. Hello. Hang on. There's a lady. The lady down here, a blonde lady.
Of a poem.
Maybe should you read the poem?
Well, I can remember the poem. The poem is the poem I wrote a few years ago, and I thought we'd put it in a song, but I tried to lengthen it and develop it, but I realized it only worked as 4 lines. And the reason I put it in the book, and the reason I called the book 100 Lyrics and a Poem, was to make the point that the lyrics are lyrics and the poem is a poem, and the poem works spoken and the lyrics are meant to be sung. And in writing a pop lyric, it's a different medium than poetry. And so the poem which I wrote, I think 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, just goes, every day it passes by, the day 1 year on which I'll die. The date is not revealed to me. It keeps its secret patiently. which is a sort of slightly morbid idea that, for instance, every, I know, October the 12th, I don't know that October the 12th in several years' time I'm going to die. But I like the fact of ending the book as well with a little meditation on death. It seemed a nice final subject. And also by a very happy coincidence, because the lyrics
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Hiya. I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I've always thought you seemed like quite a private person and that you keep your private life quite private. And
for it couldn't happen here. In a way, maybe you disguise simple meanings behind beautiful phrases or in some sort of poetic, lyrical language. But another thing is that it leads you to sort of tease people. You know, like we were at Rent, it was a sort of a tease that we'd written. They're playing a song on Radio 1 called Rent. It was obviously inspired by Rent Boys, although the song's not really about that. But as time's gone on, that doesn't really seem to matter as much because society has changed in a lot of countries anyway, so much that it just doesn't see. It all seems quite. Everything seems very normal now. And you know, if you were gay in the 80s, you had a sense that you represented a sort of specific culture, and even if you weren't saying that, it was giving you a sort of sense of undercover pride and subversion, or something like that. That can't really exist anymore, because maybe we live in a more open and healthier society here and in a lot of the world. So it probably did influence me a bit early on, but I don't think it does now. There's also the thing, of course, that when you're writing about your personal life, that involves other persons, and you don't want to sort of embarrass them. And so there's maybe a level of subterfuge simply about protecting your friends and relationships. And that's also when a sort of poetic approach can come in, maybe.
Okay, there's a gentleman here with a...
Hi, Neil. What can you tell us about Pet Shop Boys' plans for next year?
Hey! Well, mate, this isn't to do with the book, really, but anyway, never mind. I was assuming we'd be asked this. We have written, so far this year now, 24 new songs, two since the last time someone asked me this question. We're going to be releasing an album, I think, in the second half of next year. Actually, we have some other things going on, but I'm not going to... There's a sort of a theatrical stroke dance thing on the offing as well.
Sorry, was the woman in the front? Oh.
Hello, Neil.
Oh, you're in the Royal Opera House video 3 times.
Oh!
She's in the front row both nights. We just saw we're releasing whatever medium you release these things on nowadays. We're releasing the film of the Royal Opera House shows from July, which we just saw actually last week, and it actually looks. I was amazed actually. It looks really good. It looks great.
Thank
and
you.
you're in 3 shots. Yeah.
Thank you, Neil. So you've been talking about love songs. And since I very recently got a marriage proposal.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I was asking myself, which song would be perfect for as a soundtrack for a wedding or...
Well, Michael's already given it to you.
Yes, but...
Indefinite Leave to Remain.
It would be a nice song. Yes. And then I also have another question for you, if I may.
Someone told me once they were playing "You Only Tell Me You Love Me When You're Drunk" at their wedding.
At the end of the celebration.
Horrified. Absolutely horrified.
Maybe at the end of the celebration, it would be
yes.
good. And another question I have in mind is, you pay so much attention choosing the words you use in your songs, and maybe are you also following onomatopoeic choice from the songs by the sound itself of the song?
Sound, yes, I think the sound. You can when we write a song. I might sometimes have the words in advance anyway, but if I write them, I'll often go back. I was in studio with Pete Clare the week before last, just changing the lyric on a demo of a song we'd written. And then you can take it away again and then come back and change them again, and because you just want it, well, as I said earlier, to have an ease, and yet to keep you interested. And those two things have a sort of tension, really. But when you get it right, you can just tell it's right. And that sometimes takes quite a while. But yes, I do I've referred this song 3 times now, but "Love is a Bourgeois Construct." What I really liked about that was bourgeois construct. But taking academic language and putting it in a pop song. And so it was just a fun way of doing that. So that was definitely about the sound of the lyrics, the sound of the words.
Yeah, there's a gentleman up
That was
there.
it.
Is there a mic person? Yeah. See, a guy, yeah. Just behind the sound desk, standing up. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, Neil, thank you for your music. It's
Thank you.
enriched my life.
Thank you.
But the question I wanted to ask you, if you'd like to answer, because it may be personal, but I notice you've dedicated this book to Susan, Simon and Philip.
Yes.
I'm wondering who they are and what have they done to deserve this?
Very good question. Well, Susan, Simon and Philip are my sister and 2 brothers. And, they've lived through the whole trip. And I thought, and they've always been very supportive. And my brother Simon helped us, who sort of works in finance a bit. He helped us set up Cage Music, for instance, in 1983 or 4. And they've always been there and very, very supportive. And when the Pet Shop Boys took off, I've said many times before, I was 31 years old, losing my hair, had a good job. It was a totally ridiculous idea to leave. They wanted me to be editor of Smash Hits. And I threw this away because I wanted to be a pop star when I was 31. And luckily it worked out. Well, they were very supportive in that decision, which not everyone was, And so it was just my way of thanking them. And also, of course, they're my closest family.
Yeah. Okay, can somebody tell me how good we are for time?
We can do another 10 minutes, said
good.
Neil.
Yeah, great, excellent. Are you happy taking more?
Yeah,
fantastic. Trying to spread these around, but there was a lady waving around.
At the back,
Waving, yeah.
very back. Yes. In this amazing, this is only the third event in this venue, you know, apparently. It's a great venue.
Oh, didn't see this coming. Neil, you've written the most beautiful love songs that have punctuated my life. Love is a bourgeois construct, Memory of the Future. It always comes as a surprise. Thank you. My question, you're from Newcastle.
That's a good song for your wedding.
No, I got married to
No,
here.
sorry, I'm
I got
pointing it there
married
at
to
the
here.
front. No, sorry, I'm saying it always comes as a surprise, a good song for a wedding. Yeah.
But to the lady in the front, I got married to here.
Yes.
And I had
Oh,
both
to hear. Oh, very good, yeah.
And I had both my children to Pet Shop Boys songs.
Oh, God.
Anyway.
In my experience, babies like a 4 on the floor beat.
I'm kind of a fan. But here's my question. So, my darling, you're from Newcastle. Your colleague's from Blackpool.
Yes.
I'm from Doncaster. So my question is...
I've never been to Doncaster. Yeah.
Neil, keep it that way.
I mean, I've been through it on the train a gazillion times.
How has northernness affected your writing?
Well, that's a popular question. Well, of course, both Chris and I are northern, northeast and northwest. And northeast and northwest is very, very different. Northwesterners, you know, is where a lot of humour comes from. A lot of famous comedians come from the northwest. Northeasterners are much more earnest, I think. Sting springs to mind. And I'm a bit like that too, really. And also, Northeasterners are a bit more pretentious, I think. Again, the person I just mentioned, Brian Ferry, you know, but in a good way, I mean, you know. But also there is still, I think Chris and I still have